I slammed the front door behind me, the sound echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. "Fine, I'm out of here," I shouted. Olivia, my wife of 14 years, barely missed a beat before firing back. "Good, don't bother coming back." Normally, I'd toss some bitter insult over my shoulder, something like, "Go to hell," and then stomp off to cool down for a couple of hours. But not this time. This time, I wasn't cooling down. I wasn't coming back. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't in years. Clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. The past few months had been like living in a pressure cooker, with Olivia taking aim at me every chance she got. Her words weren't just sarcastic or snappy, they were calculated, like she wanted to see how deep she could cut before I finally bled out. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat, my hand lingering on the key in the ignition for a moment. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard. Leaving wasn't something I decided in a fit of rage, it was a conclusion I'd reached slowly, piece by piece, over the last year. I'd spent countless nights sitting in this same spot after work, just stalling. Stalling because I didn't want to walk back into a house where I was treated like a punching bag. The truth is, I didn't recognize Olivia anymore. Or maybe I didn't recognize us. She used to be my partner, my teammate. Somewhere along the way, she turned into a stranger. Someone who looked at me like I was the enemy. And I wasn't innocent either. I stopped fighting for us. It just seemed pointless. You can only hit a brick wall so many times before you realize you're the only one taking damage. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, not bothering to check if she was watching from the window. It didn't matter. I wasn't driving away to make a point or to win the fight. I was driving away because staying had become unbearable. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't going back to that house. As I drove through the quiet streets, my mind wandered to what had brought me here. The late-night arguments, the way Olivia's tone had shifted from annoyed to cruel over time, the nights I'd sit in my car in the driveway debating whether to go inside. I started staying later at work, using every excuse in the book to avoid going home. But no matter how late I stayed, it was always the same when I walked through the door. Olivia's sharp tongue, her passive-aggressive digs, her coldness. And then there was Emma, our 13-year-old daughter. She'd learned to avoid the tension by hiding in her room with her headphones on, acting like nothing was wrong, but I could see the cracks forming. I'd see her flinch when Olivia and I argued, or hear her mutter, "Not again," under her breath. I'd failed her too. The house wasn't just toxic for me, it was toxic for her. I realized I'd been telling myself that things might get better, that Olivia and I just needed to work through it, but deep down, I knew better. I tried talking to her, tried to figure out what had gone wrong, but every attempt ended with her shutting me down or turning the conversation into an attack. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trying altogether. And when you stop trying, what's left? By the time I reached the edge of town, the anger I'd felt earlier had melted into something else, relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't need one. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. I pulled into an empty parking lot and killed the engine. Leaning back in the seat, I stared out at the dark sky and let the quiet sink in. I didn't know what was next, but I knew this was the first step. This was the moment I decided to take back control of my life. The diner wasn't a place I frequented often, but that night it felt like the right spot to clear my head. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered a coffee, and stared blankly at the laminated menu. My mind was a mess, replaying the argument with Olivia over and over as if dissecting it would make it hurt less. It didn't. Somewhere behind me, two men were talking, their voices low but distinct in the near-empty diner. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard one of them mention Paula. I perked up at the sound of the name, not because it was familiar, but because of the way it was said. It wasn't casual. It was like a secret slipping out. "How long you been with her?" one guy asked. "Since they got hitched," the other answered with a chuckle. I froze, my ears locked in on the conversation, and suddenly every word was sharp and clear. "Hell, I even had her on their wedding day. He's clueless." The voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just familiar, it was unmistakable. It belonged to Mark. Mark, my so-called best friend, the guy who stood next to me at the altar, grinning, like he couldn't be happier for me, the guy I trusted with everything. They kept talking, but I could barely make sense of the words anymore. My heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out most of what was being said, but I caught enough to know what was happening, enough to know that Olivia had been with Mark, not just recently, but on our wedding day. I must have looked like a ghost because when the waitress came over, she asked if I was feeling okay. I mumbled something about how having to leave and bolted out of the diner before they could see me. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to unlock my car door. I sat there in the parking lot for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I just heard. My wife, my best friend. It was like the ground beneath me had split open and I was dangling over the edge, clutching at nothing. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, that maybe Mark was just bragging, trying to impress the guy he was with, but deep down, I knew better. Olivia's behavior over the past year suddenly made sense. The coldness, the way she'd avoid my eyes, the nights she'd come up with vague excuses to stay out late. I'd ignored the signs, told myself I was imagining things, but now there was no ignoring it. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets, my mind racing. By the time I parked outside the house, the sun was starting to rise, and my decision was made. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Because if Olivia was capable of lying to me for years, I couldn't trust anything she said. Later that night, after Olivia went to bed, I picked up her phone. It was locked, but it didn't take long to figure out the password. It was our daughter Lily's birthday. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages and emails, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. But it was clean, too clean, almost like she'd wiped everything on purpose. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and there was no pulling it out now. I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. I decided to dig deeper. If Mark thought I was clueless, he was about to learn otherwise. After that night at the diner, nothing felt the same. Every interaction with Olivia felt like a game of pretend, like we were actors fumbling through a poorly written script. Except she didn't know I'd been backstage overhearing the lies she thought she had so carefully hidden. I couldn't stop replaying Mark's voice in my head, his casual betrayal. "He's clueless," he'd said. Well, not anymore. I couldn't confront her outright, not without evidence. Olivia was sharp, quick to twist situations to her advantage, and I knew she'd spin this into some misunderstanding if I didn't come prepared. So I started digging, quietly and patiently. That's when the idea hit me. Lily. I know it sounds cold, bringing our daughter into this mess, but I couldn't shake the thought. Mark had bragged about being with Olivia since before we got married. That meant there was a chance, no, a possibility, that Lily wasn't mine. And if that were true, it would change everything, not just the betrayal, but the foundation of my life as I knew it. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. That night, while Olivia slept, I crept into Lily's room. She was fast asleep, her mouth slightly open, her breath steady. For a moment, guilt washed over me. She didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of this mess, but I told myself this wasn't about her. It was about me, about uncovering the lies I'd been living with for 14 years. I carefully swabbed the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip, sealing it in a plastic bag. She didn't stir, and I backed out of the room as quietly as I'd entered. Then I did the same for myself, sealing my sample in another bag. It felt surreal, like I was conducting some covert operation in my own home. The next morning, I called a lab in the next town over. I told them I needed a paternity test and made arrangements to drop off the samples. They didn't ask many questions, and I didn't offer any details. 2 days later, I drove to the lab, dropped off the samples, and started the agonizing wait for results. Those days were the longest of my life. Olivia went about her routines as if nothing had changed while I pretended everything was fine. But every time I looked at Lily, I couldn't help but wonder, was she really mine? Or had my best friend stolen even that from me? The call came late in the evening, just as I was finishing up some paperwork at my office. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Mr. Sullivan, we've completed your test. The results show there's no biological relationship between you and the child in question." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I sat there in stunned silence, the words echoing in my head, no biological relationship. Lily wasn't mine. I had suspected it, even prepared myself for it, but hearing it confirmed hit differently. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a theft of my identity, my role as a father, my trust in everything I thought my life was built on. I thanked the lab technician, hung up the phone, and just sat there in the quiet of my office. I thought about all the moments I'd shared with Lily, her first steps, her first words, the nights I stayed up with her when she was sick. All of it was real, all of it mine, even if the biology wasn't. But it wasn't enough to erase the pain of the lie. I drove home that night, the envelope with the results sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. I didn't confront Olivia right away. Not yet. This wasn't just about the test, it was about unraveling the entire web of deceit she and Mark had spun. I needed more. I needed everything. The first thing I did was sit down and take a hard look at my finances. Our house, my car dealership, the savings we built together, well, mostly built by me, were all potential battlegrounds if this turned into a divorce. And based on what I'd uncovered, I knew it would. Olivia wasn't just unfaithful, she was reckless. That recklessness had cost me enough, and I wasn't about to let it cost me more. I called my accountant, Paul, and told him I wanted to restructure my business. "Why the sudden shift, Kurt?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Just preparing for some big changes," I replied, keeping it vague. I didn't trust anyone fully at this point. Paul helped me set up a separate corporate entity for the dealership, and a legal firewall that would protect my assets if Olivia decided to come after them. Next, I contacted a real estate lawyer. I owned the house outright, having purchased it before we were married, but I wasn't naive enough to think that would keep Olivia from trying to stake a claim. The lawyer suggested I ensure all taxes and utilities were paid in full under my name alone, making it clear that I had maintained sole responsibility for the property. Meanwhile, at home, I kept everything as normal as possible. Olivia didn't suspect a thing. I went through the motions, dinners with Lily, casual conversations with Olivia, but every smile I forced felt like a betrayal of my own. I hated pretending, but I had no choice. If I tipped her off too soon, she'd start planning her own defense. One night, while Olivia and Lily were out, I began quietly packing up my personal belongings. Nothing too obvious, just a few things at a time. Things she wouldn't notice missing from the garage, old photo albums, important documents. I rented a small storage unit across town and started stashing everything there. It felt surreal, packing up my life in secret, but it was necessary. The hardest part was facing my employees. My dealership wasn't just a business, it was my pride, my proof that I could build something worthwhile. But I knew I couldn't let it become collateral damage in this war. I called Anna, my assistant manager, into my office and told her, "I'm going to make some changes around here, but I need your trust. Things might seem different soon, but I'll make sure you and the team are taken care of." Anna nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. "Whatever you need, Kurt, you've always had our backs. We'll have yours." I also started limiting Mark's involvement with the dealership. For years, I'd relied on him as an independent contractor to handle repairs. But now, every interaction with him felt like swallowing poison. I began quietly shifting repair work to other mechanics in town, people I could trust not to stab me in the back. The final piece of my plan was putting distance between myself and Olivia, literally. I leased a small apartment a few miles away, paying for it in cash to keep it off the radar. I furnished it with just the basics, enough to live comfortably if things blew up at home. It wasn't much, but it was mine, untouched by the lies that had infected everything else. By the time I was done setting things up, I felt like I was living a double life. By day, I was the husband and father Olivia and Lily thought they knew. By night, I was dismantling the life we'd built together brick by brick and preparing for the inevitable collapse. It wasn't easy, but it gave me purpose. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back control. The lies had taken so much from me, but I was determined not to let them take everything. Olivia thought she was the only one playing the game. What she didn't realize was that I'd already started rewriting the rules. The moment I stepped out of my car and walked up to the house, I knew this wasn't going to be pretty. But it was time. I'd spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, moving out my belongings, protecting my business, gathering evidence. I was done pretending. The lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, it was all coming to a head tonight. I knocked on the door, even though it was still technically my house. After a moment, Lily answered. "Dad?" she said, her voice small. She looked surprised, maybe even a little nervous. I couldn't blame her. Things had been tense for a while, and I hadn't been home much lately. "Is your mom here?" I asked. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Yeah, she's in the kitchen." I stepped inside, my stomach tightening as I walked toward the kitchen. Olivia appeared around the corner, a dish towel in her hand and a confused look on her face. "Kurt, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Mark stepped into view wearing nothing but a pair of sweatpants. For a moment, the room went completely silent. Mark froze like a deer in headlights, and Olivia's face turned pale. "Well," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "I guess the whole family's here." Olivia started to speak, her tone defensive. "What are you talking about?" I ignored her, turning my attention to Mark. "You know, for years I trusted you. You were my best friend, my best man, and all that time you were screwing my wife behind my back." My voice didn't waver, but the anger boiling underneath was unmistakable. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. Olivia, on the other hand, found her voice quickly. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, stepping forward. I laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like the man who's been sleeping with my wife for years is standing in my house half-dressed. And let me guess, it's not what it looked like on our wedding day either, right?" Olivia's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Kurt, I can explain." "You can save it," I cut her off. "I already know everything. I know about the two of you sneaking around, I know about the lies, and I know about Lily." At the mention of Lily's name, Olivia's expression shifted to something between panic and confusion. Mark just stood there, staring at the floor like a scolded child. "Lily?" Olivia repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I said, pulling the envelope with the DNA results from my jacket. "Turns out she's not my daughter, but I think we both know who her father is, don't we, Mark?" Mark finally looked up, his face ashen. Olivia took a step back, her hand covering her mouth. Lily, who had been watching silently from the doorway, gasped. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to her, softening my tone as much as I could. "I'm sorry you have to hear this, Lily. None of this is your fault, but the truth is I'm not your biological father. Mark is." Lily's face crumpled and she ran upstairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. I wanted to go after her to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not yet. I turned back to Olivia and Mark, who looked like they'd just been hit by a truck. "I'll make this simple," I said, my voice steady. "You've got until the end of next month to find somewhere else to live. This house is mine, and I'm not sharing it with either of you. And Mark," I paused, looking him dead in the eyes, "you'll never set foot in my dealership again. Your little repair gig is over." Mark didn't argue, he knew better. Olivia, on the other hand, started pleading. "Kurt, please, we can work this out." "No, we can't," I said firmly. "You made your choices, Olivia. Now you get to live with them." I turned and walked out without looking back. As I got into my car and drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, sadness. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. The lies were finally out in the open, and I was ready to rebuild my life without them. Driving away that night, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't the kind of relief that comes from joy. It was the relief that comes from ripping off a bandage. It hurts like hell, but at least the wound is exposed and the healing can finally begin. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from the lies, the betrayals, and the constant gnawing suspicion. But freedom didn't mean I was okay. Far from it. There was a storm inside me, and I had no idea how to calm it. The next few weeks were a blur. I finalized the paperwork with my lawyer to ensure that Olivia couldn't touch the dealership or the house. I started showing the property to realtors, preparing for the inevitable sale. Every step felt mechanical, like I was ticking boxes on a to-do list for a life I no longer recognized. My mind kept going back to Lily. She hadn't spoken to me since that night, not that I blamed her. She was caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't start, and it broke my heart to know she was hurting. I focused on the dealership to keep myself sane. Anna, my assistant manager, was a godsend. She kept the place running smoothly while I navigated my personal chaos. "You've got this, Kurt," she'd say whenever I felt like giving up, and somehow I believed her. The business had always been my anchor, the one thing I could rely on, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. But the hardest part was adjusting to the silence. My apartment felt like a tomb, quiet, sterile, empty. At first, I hated it. I'd come home, pour a drink, and stare at the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But over time, the silence started to feel less like a punishment and more like a blank slate. It was mine, untainted by the lies that had poisoned everything else. I started filling it with things that made me happy. Books I'd been meaning to read, photos from trips I'd taken before life got so complicated, even a secondhand guitar I hadn't touched since college. It wasn't much, but it was a start. About 3 months after the confrontation, I decided to take a trip. Nothing extravagant, just me, the open road, and a map with no specific destination. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out who I was outside of being a husband and a father. I drove through dusty desert towns, winding mountain roads, and sleepy coastal villages, stopping wherever the mood struck. It was liberating in a way I hadn't felt in years. I talked to strangers, heard their stories, and started to feel like a person again, instead of a walking wound. One day, while sitting on a cliff overlooking the ocean, it hit me. I didn't need to have all the answers. Life wasn't a puzzle I had to solve right away. It was okay to take things one step at a time, to rebuild slowly, piece by piece. I wasn't the same man I'd been before Olivia's betrayal, and that was okay. Maybe this version of me could be stronger, wiser, better. When I finally returned to Silver City, I felt like I could reclaim a part of myself. I walked into the dealership and Anna greeted me with a wide smile. "Welcome back, boss," she said, handing me a stack of paperwork. "We've been busy." It felt good to be back, to see my team thriving despite everything. But this time, I knew better than to let the business consume me. I set boundaries, started delegating more, and made time for the things that mattered. I even reached out to Lily. It wasn't easy. She was hurt and angry, and she had every right to be. But I told her the truth, that no matter what the DNA test said, she was still my daughter. It would take time to repair our relationship, but I was willing to do the work. As for Olivia and Mark, they got exactly what they deserved. The house sold, and I split the proceeds down the middle. They moved into a tiny rental on the other side of town, and last I heard, Mark was struggling to find steady work. I didn't feel sorry for them. They'd made their bed, and now they had to lie in it.